And it's the story of the American honeybee, which is that picture on your left. And the American honeybee is dying, and nobody knows why. But actually, that's not true. Lots of people know lots of whys, and that's the problem. That's the problem with problems, and the problem in particular with problems that we consider to be problems in the commons. There's no one problem, there's no one solution, and no one owner for either the problem or the solution, because nobody owns honeybee pollination. You see that picture in the middle, that's the American honeybee keeper, and he owns his bees, but he doesn't own the crops and the vegetables and the plants and the flowers where his bees go to forage for food and to pollinate. He doesn't own honeybee pollination. The modern farmer, the picture on your far right, she owns the plants and the flowers and the crops and the vegetables and the land, but she doesn't own any of the upstream production of seeds and manures and chemicals and pesticides, or any of the downstream. She doesn't own any of the retailing, packaging, and distribution that takes her plants and flowers and crops and vegetables to market. She doesn't own honeybee pollination either. And this is the story of specialization. And in modern societies, the way that we drive productivity is through specialization. And oftentimes what we find in increasingly complex environments, increasingly complex societies, gaps can open up in between specialists. There isn't a boogeyman here. There isn't somebody who's necessarily done something wrong. It is, in fact, a great story of tremendous productivity in American agriculture. We produce more food on less land with fewer people, with fewer inputs, with less energy, and less water and pesticides than at any other time in history and any place on the planet. But that great success story is a success story of specialization. And in between all of the different specialists within our food system has opened up a gap. And into that little gap has fallen our little honeybee. If you go to the next slide, Daniel. What we're faced with is a problem with a problem in the commons when our strengths become our weaknesses because they become overextended. And we are faced with what scientists call multifactorial problems. No one answer, no one problem, no one answer. There's multiple possible causes, lack of consensus on what are those causes, and a lack of consensus on what to do about them. And what we're left with is not a right versus wrong decision, but we're left with a right versus right decision. Because when you're facing a multifactorial problem, most often what you end up with is a cycle of finger pointing. It's not my honeybee husbandry practices, it's your agricultural policies. It's not my agricultural policies, it's the worldwide demand for food. And even if we can break that finger pointing cycle, at the end of the day, we're left not with trying to weigh off right versus wrong, but two competing rights. It's inherently a good idea to safeguard the health of the honeybee, yet it is also inherently a good idea to feed an ever hungrier planet. So what do you do to resolve that kind of a problem? And this is made all the worse because these problems are on a slow burn. Nobody is going to live or die tomorrow if 100 honeybees or even 100 honeybee colonies disappear. But if all of the bees in all of the world disappear, then we're all in for it, because 1 in 3 bites of food that we eat relies on honeybee pollination. Billions of dollars in North American agriculture rely on the health of the honeybee. So we're faced with this sort of complex problem. And for those of you who work in climate change, I hope you're hearing many parallels here between the problem and the plight of the honeybee and your own lives in climate change. In climate change, we have a problem that is caused by our own success as industrial civilizations. We have multiple possible causes and a lack of agreement on what those causes are, and therefore a lack of agreement on what to do about it. And we're left with trying to oftentimes play off economic development and prosperity, or at least we're told that we're having to balance off economic development and prosperity against action on climate change. And we're having to weigh these competing goods. And there is not the same level of urgency across the society for what to do about them. Daniel, does this ring true for you, or what thoughts do you have
Yeah,
about that?
yeah, I think that's exactly right. And not only that, but if you look at if you look at some of the polls on issues that people vote most recently, a week and a half ago, we see, we've historically wanted to simplify, and people will say, well, it's the economy, and yet there are a number of other values that people are constantly trying to juggle. Are they, are they social values? Are they security values? Are they economic values and interests? And the reality is it's all of the above. And in the context of organizational decision making, the same sort of challenges are being juggled. So you might be dealing with climate change, and you might also be dealing with cybersecurity considerations, or globalization, and the impacts that is having on culture and economy. You might be dealing with security conditions that seemingly are unrelated to climate change, and yet may very much be related to climate change. And so the reality is everybody is in a position where they're kind of juggling multiple interests and trying to figure out whether or not those might be competing or intersecting or overlapping or complementary sort of considerations. And that's in the context of a changing planet as well. And that really makes these sorts of considerations and working across numerous types of organizations and types of roles challenging, because nobody has, despite professional specialization, institutions are dealing with numerous things concurrently.
Yeah. And so what we're finding is that most of the most intractable problems that we face, and I think is reflected in some of the answers that you all gave in the polling questions just now, they require multiple organizations to work together to try to solve them. No single organization, as Daniel just pointed out, is positioned to solve it on their own.